When most people hear the phrase international relations, I feel like a very specific, almost cinematic image immediately pops into their head.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you picture like generals moving troops across a massive map in a war room, or, diplomats in these incredibly sharp suits shaking hands behind closed
Right,
doors.
some heavily guarded summit in Geneva or something.
Exactly. You think of border disputes, nuclear treaties, and maybe the UN General Assembly with everyone wearing those translation earpieces. Welcome to the 8th installment of our Diplomacy and International Relations Summer Series, by the way.
It's great to be back. And yeah, that image you described, it's the classic world stage metaphor.
Yeah.
We are culturally conditioned to look at the globe and just see this grand chessboard. And we assume the only pieces that matter are sovereign states.
Right, the kings and queens.
Exactly. The assumption is just that history is written by presidents, prime ministers, military commanders. It's a very top-down, almost detached way of looking at how the world actually functions.
But then, you step back and you look at the reality of your own everyday life, and suddenly that grand chessboard doesn't quite explain everything.
No, it really doesn't.
Think about it. Just think about the tag on the shirt you're wearing right now. It probably says made in Bangladesh or Vietnam.
Yeah.
Think about the coffee you drank this morning. It was probably grown in Ethiopia, priced by commodity traders in London, and then served to you by some multinational chain.
Or think about the specific factory in China that assembled the smartphone sitting in your pocket.
Right. Or even the incredibly complex offshore tax loopholes used by whatever streaming service you binge watched last night.
Yeah, exactly.
So how much of global power is actually determined by those diplomats in suits? And how much is determined by this massive invisible web of global commerce?
And that realization right there,
Mm-hmm.
that is the absolute definition of a paradigm shift. We are basically moving from a world defined purely by political borders to one defined by economic realities that, honestly, completely ignore those borders.
Which brings us to our mission for today. We are unpacking the complex web of money, power, and society that shapes our everyday lives.
We're doing a thorough analysis of a really fascinating source text today on global political economy.
We are. We're exploring this massive shift away from traditional state versus state politics and stepping into the reality of a truly global political economy.
And the kicker here is that in this new system, you, the listener, as a consumer, as a worker, and as a voter, you are sitting squarely in the center of the board.
Right in the middle of the action. And before we really get going, just a quick reminder. Please encourage us by following and subscribing to the show.
Always appreciated.
Yeah, and you can also subscribe to us on Patreon. That really helps keep the show running. And you gain access to extra content, plus our weekly and monthly briefings on Danish politics.
Which is super relevant to today's topic, actually.
It really is. The Patreon link is right there in the description. So, to understand how the global economy works today, we first have to, understand the old lens we use to view the world.
Right. And why that old lens broke.
Exactly. So traditionally, the academic focus was entirely on international political economy.
Right. IPE.
Yeah. And the word international is the operating mechanism there.
Exactly. It literally means between nations.
Right.
The focus was just exclusively on the interactions, the rivalries, and the trade agreements between sovereign states. The state was basically considered the ultimate container of power.
So going back to that chessboard metaphor from earlier, the traditional view is like watching a high-stakes match, but you are only paying attention to the kings and the queens.
Yeah.
You're tracking the royal movements, these big, sweeping geopolitical plays, and you are ignoring absolutely everything else on the table.
Right. And the modern approach, the Global Political Economy Framework, or GPE, it just shatters that limitation. Substituting that word global for international, it fundamentally broadens the scope.
So it's not just nations anymore.
No, not at all. It brings non-elites, everyday individuals, and massive multinational corporations onto the center stage, right alongside the states.
So we aren't just watching the kings and queens. It's like suddenly realizing the pawns actually have their own agendas.
Exactly.
And not just that, the chessboard itself is like manufactured by a multinational corporation.
Right, yeah.
The rules of the game are being lobbied for in real time, and there are outside private investors betting billions on the outcome of the match.
That's a perfect way to put it. It acknowledges that the global division of labor affects our lives just as much as a country's foreign policy does.
But here is my lingering question with all this. If everyday people and merchants and businesses have always been the actual engines of the economy throughout history.
Which they have.
Right. Then why did it take scholars so long to zoom out and adopt this global perspective? Why were we just staring at governments for so long?
Well, it was really the sheer velocity and the deep integration of modern globalization that forced the realization.
What do you mean by velocity?
So go back to the post-World War II era. States had a relatively tight grip on their national economies back then.
Mm.
They controlled their currencies heavily, they regulated cross-border finance, they managed domestic industries.
Okay, so they actually were the main players then.
They were. But as technological changes accelerated, and we're talking specifically about the internet, mass satellite communication, and the digitization of finance, the rapid flow of capital just became unstoppable.
Because money could suddenly move across the planet at the speed of light.
Exactly. States found that they just could no longer contain or control economic activity the way they used to.
The container sprang 1,000 leaks.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Now, states haven't disappeared, obviously. They're certainly still central players, but they now have to share the stage.
Right.
They are caught in this highly complex web of mutual dependence. You have transnational corporations operating across dozens of borders with revenues that are literally larger than many countries' GDPs.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And you have 9 governmental organizations wielding massive influence over public opinion, plus everyday citizens who can organize globally in an instant.
So the old state-centric model simply couldn't account for the power of an entity like, say, Amazon.
Right, or a decentralized movement of citizens.
Okay, so if the global political economy places individuals and markets at the center of this massive web, we really need to understand the underlying philosophy driving these markets, right?
We do. We need to look at the engine.
Exactly. We have to go back to the foundational ideas of the liberal economic approach. And that starts with Adam Smith in 1776.
That's classic.
Right. He introduces the concept of the invisible hand, but crucially for our topic, the division of labor. And he has this incredibly famous example of a pin factory that illustrates this perfectly.
Yeah, the pin factory is basically the perfect distillation of how economic thinking shifted.
Do you break it down for us?
So Smith pointed out that if you take an untrained worker and you ask them to manufacture a metal pin from scratch.
Like one person doing the whole thing.
Right. They have to mine the metal, smelt it, draw the wire, straighten it, cut it, point it, attach the head. They might make, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 pins a whole day.
Which is an incredibly inefficient use of human labor.
Exactly. It's terribly inefficient. But
Okay.
then Smith introduces the magic of specialization.
Right.
He argues that if you take 10 people and you divide the manufacturing process into 18 distinct operations.
So one person solely draws the wire.
Yep. Another only straightens it, a third exclusively cuts it. Those same 10 people can produce upwards of 48,000 pins in a single day.
Wow. So the output per person just skyrockets.
It does. This is the intellectual birth of the assembly line concept.
Hmm.
The core thesis is that specialization and cooperation create exponentially more wealth than isolation.
Okay, so let's fast forward a few decades to 1817, because David Ricardo takes Smith's factory-level idea and he applies it to the entire planet.
He really scales it up.
He does. Ricardo introduces the theory of comparative advantage. And the claim here is that free, unhindered commerce is the ultimate engine for global prosperity.
Right.
The idea is that if every country specializes in producing what it is most efficient at making and then trades freely with everyone else, the overall global wealth increases.
And the mechanics of Ricardo's math are actually brilliant. It is vital to understand how it works to understand modern trade.
Walk us through his example, because I think it helps clarify things.
Sure. So Ricardo used the example of England and Portugal. Imagine both countries produce only 2 things, cloth and wine.
Okay.
Let's say Portugal is blessed with incredible weather and resources, so they are absolutely better and more efficient at producing both wine and cloth than England.
Right, and England has terrible weather, so their wine production is awful and their cloth production is just, okay.
Exactly. So in a competitive zero-sum worldview, England is doomed.
Portugal should just make everything and dominate the market entirely.
That is the instinct. But Ricardo proves mathematically that it is still beneficial for both countries to trade.
Wait, how? If Portugal is better at everything.
Because even if Portugal is better at both, their advantage in wine is massive, while their advantage in cloth is only slight.
Ah, okay.
So Ricardo argued that Portugal should stop making cloth entirely. They should put 100% of their national energy into wine. And England should put 100% of its energy into cloth.
So they completely specialize.
Yes. And when they trade, Portugal gets more cloth for its wine than it could have made domestically with that same effort. And England gets more wine for its cloth.
So by specializing in their comparative advantage, the total global output of wine and cloth increases.
Exactly. The mathematical outcome is that free trade is a guaranteed win-win.
It's essentially the bedrock argument for taking down borders and tariffs.
It really is.
And that brings us to the modern era, to what is broadly called neoliberalism. If Smith and Ricardo built the engine, neoliberalism is throwing jet fuel into it.
Oh, absolutely.
Emerging prominently in the late 1970s and 80s, with figures like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, neoliberalism advocates for aggressively deregulating economic activity.
Right. Privatizing public services that the state used to run.
Cutting taxes for the wealthy to spur investment, and allowing capital to move completely freely across borders. The goal is unprecedented economic growth.
Yeah, the neoliberal promise basically posits that removing the heavy hand of the state from the market will lead to maximum efficiency.
Right.
The market, if left alone, will naturally find the most efficient way to allocate resources. And that leads to cheaper goods, more innovation, and a wealthier world overall.
Which brings us to a massive, unavoidable collision. Because while Ricardo's math looks perfect on a chalkboard, human beings don't live on chalkboards.
No, they certainly do not.
And this is where Karl Polanyi enters the picture. Writing in the mid-20th century, Polanyi looked back at the historical contradictions that followed the 19th century Industrial Revolution. And he noticed a severe pattern.
A very severe pattern.
He formulated a counter-argument to this unfettered free market. He argued that markets are not just abstract mathematical price mechanisms floating in the ether.
Right.
Markets are deeply, inextricably embedded in social communities.
And Polanyi's concept of embeddedness is absolutely crucial here.
Expand on that a bit.
So classical economists treat land, labor, and money as mere commodities. Just things to be bought and sold at market price.
Right, just inputs in an equation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Polanyi pointed out the glaring reality. Labor is human life. Land is the natural environment we live in.
Yeah.
You cannot strip these elements down to mere economic variables without causing profound damage to the community itself.
I want to try an analogy to visualize this tension because it's so important. Let's imagine the neoliberal economic model is an incredibly powerful, high-speed train engine.
Okay, I like this.
It's driving faster trade, massive wealth generation, pushing the absolute limits of speed and efficiency. That's the dream of Smith and Ricardo realized. But Polanyi is standing there pointing out that a train doesn't run in a vacuum. It runs on tracks.
Yes.
And those tracks represent the social fabric of our communities, our cultural norms, our need for stability, our local environments.
Exactly.
If the train accelerates too fast without any regard for the condition of the tracks beneath it, the passengers are going to panic. They are going to feel the train shaking violently. They're going to see the bolts flying off the rails.
And eventually, as a matter of pure survival, they are going to pull the emergency brake.
Right.
And that emergency brake is what Polanyi termed the double movement, or the counter movement.
Okay, so the pushback.
Yes. Polanyi argued that unfettered free market policies inherently cause severe social disruption and deep inequality.
Give me an example of how that looks in the real world.
Sure. When the market demands that a factory close in Ohio and move to Shenzhen because the labor is cheaper,
Yeah.
which is just following this strict logic of comparative advantage, the local community in Ohio is absolutely devastated.
Right.
Society operates with a natural defense mechanism. When pushed too far by the brutality of the open market, people will organically push back.
They don't just sit there and take it.
Exactly. They will demand protection, regulation, tariffs. They'll demand a return of state intervention to shield their communities from the whims of global capital.
Let me push back on this, though, just playing devil's advocate using Ricardo's own logic.
Okay, go for it.
Because Ricardo's comparative advantage proves that the overall global pie gets bigger with free trade.
It does.
It mathematically demonstrates a win-win scenario. More wealth is generated globally. So if it's a proven net positive on paper, why does Polanyi insist it inherently causes this social decay and panic?
Because the fundamental flaw in looking only at the global pie is the dynamic of winners and losers.
Okay, explain that.
Yes, at a macro global level, the total amount of wealth generated increases. But the distribution of that new wealth is wildly uneven. The slice of the pie going to specific, individual workers often shrinks to zero. The winners in this system, the owners of capital, the multinational corporations, the highly specialized tech workers, they capture the vast majority of the gains.
And then what do they do with it?
They use that newly acquired wealth and influence to lobby for even more deregulated free market policies.
Ah, they fuel the train to go even faster.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the losers, the factory workers whose jobs are outsourced, the local businesses crushed by multinational conglomerates, the farmers competing against heavily subsidized foreign imports, they suffer immediate, tangible devastation.
Yeah.
They lose their livelihoods. Their local tax bases collapse, schools underperform, and communities decay. The math might work beautifully at the global level, but human beings do not live at the global level.
They live in their local towns, paying their local mortgages.
Precisely. And when that localized suffering reaches a critical mass, it coalesces into widespread societal unrest.
So the pie gets massive, but millions of people suddenly find themselves locked out of the bakery entirely.
That's a great way to phrase it, yeah.
That tension between the cold, mathematical efficiency of the global market and the emotional, physical needs of local society is the pendulum swinging.
And this isn't just academic theory.
No, we need to look at how specific individuals are actively living out this tension today. Because we are all passengers on this train.
We really are. And the 2008 financial crisis is arguably the most potent modern watershed moment for this exact dynamic.
Oh, absolutely.
It perfectly showcased how non-elite individuals bore the absolute brunt of elite financial failures, which triggered a massive Polanyi-style counter-movement.
Let's break down the mechanics of how that actually happened, because it's the ultimate example of the disconnect between global finance and everyday life.
Right.
So Wall Street created these incredibly complex financial instruments, specifically collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs.
Right, the infamous CDOs.
Yeah. They were taking thousands of individual home mortgages, bundling them together into a single package, and selling slices of that package to global investors.
And the underlying assumption, the flaw in the market logic, was that housing prices would always go up.
Which is crazy in hindsight.
It is. But because of the neoliberal push for deregulation, banks were handing out subprime mortgages to people they knew could not afford them, just so they could bundle them and sell them to investors in London, Tokyo, and Frankfurt.
The global market demanded more product, so the local standards were completely eroded.
Exactly.
But when the housing bubble burst, the music stopped. But it wasn't just abstract numbers vanishing from bank ledgers. The fallout was devastatingly human.
Very human.
Mortgage holders lost their homes to foreclosure. College students graduated into a completely dead economy with no job prospects. Small, self-employed workers saw their credit lines dry up instantly, bankrupting businesses that had nothing to do with housing.
Yeah.
These ordinary individuals were the ones who suffered the massive austerity measures, the slashed public budgets, and the job losses.
While the massive financial institutions whose reckless gambling triggered the crisis were deemed too big to fail and received trillions of dollars in taxpayer bailouts.
Which perfectly sets the stage for Polanyi's counter-movement. When society suffers that profound of a shock, when the injustice is that glaring, citizens don't just passively accept it.
No, they don't. They utilize the very tools that built globalization, the internet, social media, cheap international travel, to organize a backlash against it.
Right. We saw the rise of ultra-globalization.
Yes.
Instead of rejecting the concept of global connection entirely, these movements reject the specific corporate-dominated neoliberal version of it.
Right. Look at the World Social Forum held in Montreal, Canada in 2016.
Yeah, that was huge.
You had tons of thousands of activists, indigenous groups, union members, and environmentalists gathering from all over the planet. Their rallying cry was literally, "Another world is needed together. It is possible."
It's a direct grassroots rejection of the train, prioritizing speed over the passengers.
And the ultra-globalization movement highlights the fundamental contradictions baked into the current global system.
Like what?
Well, one of the most glaring contradictions is the issue of migration.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Under the strict neoliberal framework, factors of production are supposed to move freely. Capital moves across borders in milliseconds. Goods cross oceans on massive container ships with minimal friction.
Right.
But human labor does not enjoy that freedom. Liberal systems carefully, almost surgically, manage human movement based strictly on economic supply and demand.
Think about Canada's points-based visa system as a prime example of this mechanics in action.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
A border isn't just an open door or closed wall. It's a highly sophisticated filtering mechanism. Canada grants entry based on specific regional economic needs and skills.
Right.
They literally assign points to a human being. Are you a highly trained software engineer, fluent in English and French? You get a high score? Come on in.
Do we have a specific shortage of agricultural workers in a particular province this season? We will issue temporary visas that tie you to that specific job.
It is the ultimate commodification of labor, that plan you learned about.
It really is.
Yeah.
The system treats a person not as a citizen with inherent rights, but as a specialized piece of machinery imported to fill a temporary gap in the National Assembly line.
Yeah.
The global economy aggressively embraces the free movement of wealth, but heavily polices, restricts, and criminalizes the movement of the people who actually generate that wealth.
And while we see this profound friction and pushback at the grassroots level, the alter globalization protests, the migrant struggles, we also see a very different kind of individual action happening at the very top of the economic pyramid.
Yes, we do.
This brings us to a phenomenon known as philanthrocapitalism.
Philanthrocapitalism represents a fascinating shift in global power dynamics. We're looking at a specific class of mega-billionaires. Individuals like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, George Soros, and Mark Zuckerberg. Because of the hyper-efficiency of the global market, these individuals have amassed wealth that rivals the GDP of entire nations. But they have transcended the traditional business world. They aren't just content with selling software or running hedge funds anymore.
They are using their unprecedented personal wealth to directly bypass state governments and influence global policy.
Exactly.
You look at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and their work with the World Health Organization. In some years, the Gates Foundation is the second largest contributor to the WHO.
Trailing only the United States government.
Right, outspending entire developed countries. They are dictating policy on public health, vaccine distribution, education reform, disease eradication.
They are effectively acting as global policymakers. They launch massive agricultural initiatives in Africa or fund educational overhauls in American school districts.
Yeah.
But the crucial distinction is that they do this without being elected by any constituency.
Which is the crazy part. I look at this philanthrocapitalism model, and it feels remarkably like a medieval king standing on the balcony of his castle, throwing gold coins down to the peasants.
That's quite an image.
But it's true. It might be genuinely helpful to the peasant who catches a coin, but the king is doing it to stop them from revolting and burning down the castle.
Right. Some might frame this as enlightened self-interest.
The billionaires realize that if inequality gets too extreme, the system that made them rich will collapse.
Yes.
So I have to ask a deeply cynical question here.
Let's hear it.
If these billionaires are gathering at exclusive summits in Davos, funding massive global campaigns to alleviate poverty, is this a genuine, legitimate form of new global governance? Or is it essentially just a massive self-preservation tax they are voluntarily paying to keep the pitchforks away and protect their corporate monopolies?
Well, that question cuts right to the heart of the crisis of democratic legitimacy. When a single billionaire can dictate the public health initiatives for an entire developing nation simply because they can outspend the local government, the lines between private wealth and public policy are completely erased.
Yeah, completely.
Are these celebrity entrepreneurs truly capable of solving systemic global issues? Can an architect of a monopoly realistically dismantle the inequality their monopoly helps create?
Probably not.
Their private, highly exclusive networks operate outside of public transparency. If a government implements a bad health policy, the citizens can vote them out.
Right.
If a philanthropic foundation implements a bad policy, there is absolutely zero mechanism for public accountability.
Nobody voted them in, and nobody can vote them out. They elected themselves by virtue of having the largest bank accounts.
Exactly.
So we have everyday individuals exerting pressure from the bottom, migrants crossing borders, citizens protesting at the World Social Forum, and we have billionaires exerting massive pressure from the top through philanthrocapitalism. This forces us to look at the entity that used to run the board, the entity now trapped right in the middle of this vice, the sovereign state.
Yes, the state. The traditional sovereign state has found itself in a remarkably precarious, almost subservient position.
How so?
Since the intense acceleration of globalization in the 1990s, the state has lost its privileged monopoly on power. The modern iteration of the state is often referred to in political economy as the competition state.
The competition state. That sounds like a terrifying reality TV show where bureaucrats have to survive on an island.
Functionally, it operates on a similar survival logic, to be honest. Nations no longer just manage their domestic affairs. They must actively compete against every other nation on Earth to attract foreign direct investment, or FDI.
Because multinational corporations have capital and they are looking for a place to put it.
Exactly. To win this competition and secure those factories and jobs, states have to create incredibly business-friendly environments.
Let's break down how a state actually attracts that FDI. What are the levers they pull?
Well, they engage in regulatory arbitrage.
Meaning?
They slash corporate tax rates, sometimes offering zero tax holidays for a decade. They weaken domestic labor unions to guarantee a pliant, cheap workforce. They roll back environmental regulations so factories can operate more cheaply.
Wow.
They build massive publicly funded infrastructure ports, highways, specific power grids, solely to service these incoming corporations.
So the whole focus shifts.
It does. Consequently, civil servants and elected officials find their roles completely altered. They act less like public servants protecting the citizenry and more like middle managers overseeing privatized services, desperately trying to keep foreign corporate investors happy.
And the multinational corporations hold absolutely all the leverage in this negotiation because of global supply chains.
Right.
Technology and logistics have allowed these massive companies to completely sever the connection between where a product is conceived, where it is manufactured, and where it is sold.
Take Apple as the quintessential example here.
Okay.
Apple represents the pinnacle of global supply chain mastery. They design an incredibly high-tech, beautiful piece of hardware, like the iPhone at their headquarters in Cupertino, California.
Right. So the intellectual property, the software, the branding, the highest value elements, they remain in the U.S.
Yes, but the physical reality of the phone is a global journey.
Walk us through it.
They source the displays from South Korea or Japan, the memory chips from Taiwan, the rare earth minerals from Africa.
Yeah.
And then, crucially, the actual assembly of millions of these intricate components takes place in massive factory cities, in places like Shenzhen, China, operated by contractors like Foxconn.
So Apple doesn't even own the factories.
No, they contract the labor out, because the cost of a worker in Shenzhen is a tiny fraction of the cost of a worker in California. And the Chinese state has provided immense infrastructure and a highly disciplined labor force to attract that exact contract.
The political implications of this are staggering, and there is a famous interaction that really highlights the impotence of the modern state in the face of this reality.
The Obama and Jobs dinner.
Yes. In 2011, U.S. President Barack Obama sat down at a dinner with Apple's Steve Jobs. Obama, who was facing immense domestic pressure over lost manufacturing jobs, explicitly asked Jobs what it would take to make iPhones in the United States.
Right. Could that manufacturing ever return home?
And Steve Jobs, looking directly at the President of the United States, bluntly replied, "Those jobs aren't coming back."
Those jobs aren't coming back. It is a defining quote of the era.
It really is.
It demonstrates that even the leader of arguably the most powerful political and military force on Earth is structurally powerless against the mathematical reality of global supply chains. The president cannot force a multinational corporation to prioritize domestic employment over global efficiency.
And the power imbalance doesn't stop at outsourcing jobs. It bleeds directly into the very lifeblood of the state.
Right.
Taxation.
Oh, absolutely.
Multinational corporations possess the armies of lawyers, the accounting resources, and the global footprint to leverage international tax rules entirely to their advantage. They don't just avoid taxes, they engineer their corporate structures to make taxation nearly impossible.
Let's examine the mechanics of corporate tax evasion, because it is a highly sophisticated form of legal engineering.
Give me an example.
Consider the case of Netflix International a few years ago. Netflix had roughly 4.5 million paying subscribers in the United Kingdom.
Okay.
They were generating massive, tangible revenue from British citizens. Yet, for a period, Netflix was completely exempt from UK corporation tax.
Wait, completely exempt?
Yes. And they routed their European profits in a way that resulted in them paying an income tax rate of roughly 5% in Luxembourg.
How does that actually work legally? I mean, how do you make millions in the UK and pay the tax in Luxembourg? It feels like a magic trick.
It relies on licensing intellectual property and transfer pricing.
Okay, translate that for us.
Netflix sets up a subsidiary in the UK. That UK entity collects the subscription money from British citizens. It looks like profit.
Right.
But then Netflix sets up a different subsidiary in a low-tax jurisdiction like Luxembourg. And that Luxembourg entity legally owns the rights to the Netflix technology and content.
Oh, I see where this is going.
The Luxembourg entity then charges the UK entity a massive licensing fee for the right to use the Netflix brand and platform.
So the UK subsidiary pays all its revenue to the Luxembourg subsidiary as an expense.
Exactly. The UK entity's profits are completely wiped out by this massive expense, meaning they owe zero corporate tax in the UK.
Wow.
The money has successfully been transferred to Luxembourg as profit. And because Luxembourg operates as a competition state itself, they have negotiated incredibly low tax rates, often in the single digits, to attract these massive corporations to route their money through them.
And this is completely legal.
It is perfectly legal under current international frameworks.
Yeah.
It is called profit shifting.
We've seen massive public outrage over this. Companies like Google, Amazon, and Starbucks have faced public reprimands, boycotts, and parliamentary inquiries for utilizing similar structures. Like, what is it, the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich routing method?
Yes, that's a famous one.
But let me push back on the public anger here. Don't hate the player, hate the game. If a corporation like Netflix is strictly following the letter of the law, utilizing loopholes that governments intentionally created to attract business, shouldn't citizens direct their fury at the politicians writing these tax codes, rather than the corporations whose fiduciary duty is simply to maximize shareholder profit?
The anger directed at the state is entirely justified, actually. But it exposes the ultimate paralyzing dilemma of the modern competition state.
Which is?
We have to bring Polanyi's pendulum back into the picture. Governments are caught in a vicious trap.
Okay, explain the trap.
On one side, they face their citizens. They absolutely must offer social safety nets, healthcare, unemployment benefits, and retraining programs to appease the specific losers of globalization, the factory workers who lost their jobs to Shenzhen.
Right. If the state fails to provide these tracks for the high-speed train, they face riots, populist voting backlashes, and societal collapse.
Exactly. They have to pay for the emergency brake. But to fund those essential, expensive social programs, the state relies on tax revenue.
And the corporations aren't paying it.
Because the primary potential source of that vast revenue, the multinational corporations, are incredibly mobile. If the UK government suddenly demands a 30% tax on all revenue generated within its borders, closing the loopholes, the multinational corporation simply threatens to move its European headquarters, its high-paying tech jobs, and its infrastructure to Ireland, or the Netherlands, or Luxembourg.
So the state is terrified of capital flight.
Exactly. So nations engage in a race to the bottom, undercutting each other's tax rates to appease the corporations, thereby starving themselves of the funds needed to protect their citizens.
Man.
The state is squeezed from the bottom by public demand and squeezed from the top by corporate mobility.
It's an unsustainable paradox.
It really is.
And since individual sovereign states are clearly struggling to rein in these massive MNCs, prevent tax base erosion, and manage global economic crises on their own, it leads us to the final piece of the architectural puzzle.
Global governance.
Right. What happens when states realize they can't survive the competition state model alone and they decide to team up? Does global governance actually work?
It is the logical, evolutionary next step in the global political economy. If you cannot regulate hypermobile capital at the national level, you must attempt to regulate it at the regional or global level. We see this attempt heavily in the rise of regional governance. Countries form massive blocs to manage trade, standardize regulations, and integrate politically to increase their collective bargaining power. You have NAFTA in North America, Mercosur in South America, ASEAN in Southeast Asia, and ECOWAS in West Africa.
But the undisputed heavyweight champion, the most ambitious experiment in regional governance in human history, is the European Union.
Oh, without a doubt. The European Union is a fascinating attempt to solve the Polanyi dilemma.
How so?
It is an effort to run the high-speed neoliberal train of a single, frictionless market while simultaneously building incredibly robust, standardized social tracks beneath it.
Right.
The EU's single market guarantees the four freedoms: the free movement of goods, capital, services, and people across member states.
So, like, a Danish company can sell wind turbines in Spain with zero tariffs, and a French bank can freely invest in a Polish tech startup.
Exactly. It creates a massive, highly efficient economic bloc capable of going toe-to-toe with the U.S. and China. But, crucially, the EU attempts to cushion this brutal market efficiency with overarching mandatory environmental and social standards. If a multinational corporation wants access to the lucrative European market, They have to comply with EU regulations on data privacy, worker rights, and carbon emissions.
So the EU acts as a massive regulatory superpower.
Yes.
However, forcing multiple sovereign nations to share a single economic policy and a single currency creates immense friction. The train still shakes violently.
It certainly does.
We saw member states like Sweden and Denmark intentionally opting out of the euro currency to maintain some control over their own central banks.
Right.
And of course, the seismic shock of the 2016 Brexit vote.
Brexit was the ultimate manifestation of the Polanyi counter-movement on a regional scale.
Explain that connection.
Millions of British citizens felt that the rapid integration of the EU, the loss of local regulatory control to bureaucrats in Brussels, and the free movement of labor had eroded their local communities and depressed their wages. They pulled the emergency brake on their carriage and decoupled from the train entirely, preferring the chaotic uncertainty of isolation over the perceived loss of sovereignty.
Despite the incredible friction of events like Brexit, we still see these organizations being forced to work together out of pure necessity through interdependent crisis management.
We do.
When the 2008 financial crisis mutated into the European sovereign debt crisis, individual states couldn't handle the fallout. The EU, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund had to form a troika to jointly bail out and restructure the economies of states like Ireland and Greece.
Right.
The global problems, whether it's sovereign debt defaults or climate change requiring the UN to collaborate with NGOs, are simply too massive for any single state to handle in isolation.
But as we scale up from regional blocs like the EU to truly global institutions, we encounter a severe structural flaw that undermines their legitimacy.
Okay, what is it?
This is known in political economy as the democratic deficit.
Right, the democratic deficit.
Let's examine the World Trade Organization, the WTO. It is the global referee for trade rules, boasting 164 member states. The WTO operates on a consensus basis, essentially a one-country, one-vote system for its trade ministers.
On paper, that sounds incredibly fair. The smallest developing nation technically has the same voting power as the United States.
On paper, yes. Yet, in practice, the WTO is heavily criticized by civil society groups in developing nations for being effectively captured by a handful of wealthy nations.
How does that happen if everyone gets one vote?
Because the crucial negotiations don't happen in the massive General Assembly where everyone votes. They happen in informal, closed-door meetings, often called green room meetings, where only the most powerful economies, like the US, the EU, and China, are invited. They hammer out the complex terms of global trade behind closed doors and then present the finalized agreement to the rest of the members as a fait accompli.
And the smaller nations just have to accept it.
Basically. They lack the massive legal teams and diplomatic leverage to push back, so they simply fall in line. The democratic facade masks a deeply oligarchic reality.
And if the WTO's democratic deficit is somewhat hidden behind closed doors, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, proudly displays its deficit right on the front porch.
They really do.
The IMF is the global lender of last resort. It has 189 member states, but they do not operate on a one-country, one-vote system. Not even close.
No, the IMF voting structure is explicitly tied to wealth. They allocate voting rights proportionally based on a quota system. A country's quota is determined by its financial contribution to the fund, which is based on the size of its economy.
Let me bring back the corporate analogy here. The IMF literally operates like a corporate boardroom.
It does.
Voting power is determined by how many shares you buy. The United States contributes the most money, so it holds roughly 16.5% of the total voting power. Since major IMF decisions require an 85% supermajority, the U.S. single-handedly possesses veto power over the most crucial global economic decisions. If they don't like a bailout package, it doesn't happen.
The math is stark. A coalition of advanced economies controls the vast majority of the votes, while the dozens of developing nations in Africa who frequently rely on IMF loans possess a fraction of a percent of voting power combined.
Isn't it structurally impossible for the IMF to be a fair democratic referee for the world's poorest nations when the richest nations are literally buying the rulebook?
You've hit on the agonizing trade-off at the very heart of global economic governance.
Which is?
It is the inescapable friction between democratic accountability and effective rapid crisis management.
Okay, expand on that.
Why is the IMF structured like a corporation? Because when a massive economic crisis hits, say a country is rapidly defaulting on its debt and its currency is collapsing, you need hundreds of billions of dollars deployed immediately to stabilize the global system.
You need the fire department to have water in the truck.
Exactly. And the only entities with that much financial water are the world's wealthiest economies. The quota system ensures that those wealthy nations feel secure providing that capital.
Because they have control over it.
Right. If the IMF were purely democratic, one country, one vote, the United States and the EU would hesitate to fund it, terrified that a coalition of developing nations could simply vote to redistribute American and European taxpayer money in ways they oppose. The wealthy nations demand control in exchange for their capital.
So efficiency and financial firepower come at the direct cost of democracy.
Precisely. The structure guarantees the institution has the muscle to act during a crisis, but it inherently alienates the grassroots movements and the developing nations who feel, quite accurately, that brutal austerity measures and structural adjustment programs are being dictated to them by an unelected, wealthy cabal in Washington, D.C.
It's a bleak picture. We have runaway neoliberal trains, states caught in tax evasion traps, billionaires buying global health policy, and global institutions operating like aristocratic boardrooms.
It sounds bad when you list it all out like that.
It really does. But to conclude our analysis, we have to look at the other side of Polanyi's coin. Polanyi wasn't a pure pessimist. He believed deeply in historical optimism.
He did. Yes, the institutions are deeply flawed and heavily skewed toward the wealthy. The multinational corporations wield incredible, unprecedented power.
Right.
But Polanyi reminds us that under exceptional pressure, ordinary people, the massive silent majority, retain an incredible transformative capacity.
Because the social fabric can only be stretched so thin.
Exactly. When inequality becomes truly unbearable, grassroots movements have historically instigated massive, foundational institutional change.
The pawns can flip the board.
They have before, and the underlying logic of the double movement suggests they will again. The system, no matter how entrenched it seems, is not immune to the collective will of the people it governs.
What does this all mean for us? Let's give you some key takeaways. First, economics and politics cannot be separated in international relations. The decisions driving global power are just as likely to be made in a corporate boardroom as a diplomatic summit.
Second, the lens you use changes everything. The global political economy perspective shows us that markets are not natural occurrences. They are political constructs with clear winners and losers, which inevitably sparks pushback.
And third, watch for the friction. Whether it's debates on free trade, sanctions, or economic statecraft, pay attention to the tension between global market efficiency and local social stability.
It's the defining struggle of our era.
So we've traveled from Adam Smith's 18th century pin factory to the hyper-efficient supply chains of Steve Jobs. We've traced the flow of money from subprime mortgages in Ohio to tax havens in Luxembourg. We've seen the power struggles from the grassroots protests in Montreal to the closed-door boardroom of the IMF.
It's quite a journey.
And it brings us to a final, profound realization. The global economy is not an unstoppable natural weather system. It is not a hurricane that we just have to bunker down and endure while hoping our roof doesn't blow off.
No, it's not.
It is entirely a human construct. It was built by people, by their laws, their philosophies, and their corporate charters, and therefore it can be changed by people.
If markets are truly embedded in social relations, as Polanyi argued, then we're not just passive participants observing the machine, we are the social fabric. Every single action we take, large or small, sends a ripple through that complex web.
That is the crucial takeaway. Every time you click buy online and choose a product built in a specific factory, every time a massive company lobbies your local government for a tax break, and every single time voters go to the ballot box to elect the politicians who write those tax codes, the rules of the game are actively being rewritten.
You are on the board.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. Reflect on your own position in this massive global political economy. Are you just a passive consumer letting the high-speed train carry you wherever the rails happen to lead? Or are you part of the counter-movement? Look closer at the origin of the products sitting in your home right now. Look at the tag on your shirt, the components in your phone, the route your digital subscriptions take. Question the massive, unseen global forces that brought them there. Because once you start seeing the intricate, fragile threads connecting us all, you realize that the power to change the game has always been in our hands.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us for this analysis. Please remember to follow the show and rate us 5 stars so we can reach even more people. And if you're interested in our deep dive into Danish politics, grab that Patreon link in the description.
We really appreciate the support.
We do. Join us for our next episode, where we'll be exploring the fascinating intersection of religion and culture. See you then.